Darius Gray, original member of the Genesis Group, which is a support group for Black Latter-day Saints. Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Now, you joined the LDS Church long before the ban on blacks holding the priesthood and receiving temple blessings was lifted.
Yes.
You knew about that ban going in. You knew that you would not be able to take your family to the temple to receive those blessings before you joined the church. Why did you become a Latter-day Saint?
Because God told me to. Simple answer. I did not know until the night before my scheduled baptism that I wouldn't be able to hold the priesthood. I didn't know that I wouldn't be able to do everything that all other Latter-day Saints did. And it was the night before, when I was having what I call the exit interview with the missionaries, that I learned of it. And my honest response was, there's no way in hell I'm going to join that church tomorrow. And then I entered into prayer that night. And the next day I was baptized. And it really came down to that, receiving personal revelation that said very simply, this is the restored gospel, and you are to join. No mention of the priesthood restriction, whether it was just, unjust, God, or man, just you are to join. That's how I was able to join, and it's also why I've been able to stay as a Latter-day Saint.
How did you deal with the constant reminder that you were being denied these blessings of the priesthood and the temple? How did you deal with that on a day-to-day basis and allow your faith to grow?
It comes back to that same point. If you have heard what you believe to be the voice of deity saying to you that you are to join, you don't understand all of the nuances and the ramifications of, but if you've heard that voice, you can't deny it. And that's where I was. Was it painful? Yes. Did you feel isolated? Yes. Did I think it would ever change in my lifetime? No. I saw no hope of that. And yet I had what we Latter-day Saints call an abiding testimony, a firm testimony. And with the experience of the night prior to my baptism, I was in.
What were you told was the reason why you could not hold the priesthood and could not go to the temple?
Simply because of my race, that I was Negro, had Negroid blood, a dark skin, and I was cursed. And I would not be able to hold that priesthood or receive the blessings that came along with that priesthood. I grew up in a family of very proud black members on both sides, my mom and my father's side. Mom had a 4th grade education, Dad had a 5th. But we were taught to value education. We were taught to work hard, to be proud of our race, our heritage. I grew up in a time when I heard stories growing up, back in slave times, such and such and such and such. Bob, my father was born in 1896. That was the same year as Plessy versus Ferguson, Supreme Court case. I heard those stories because my grandfather on my father's side was born in Missouri, a slave, in 1859. So all of this being proud of who we were and what we could be was just routine in our family. And then to have that confront, no, you're cursed, you can't be a full member, you can't hold the priesthood, it wasn't easy. But I really felt I had no other choice because of what God had said.
How is your faith different from Latter-day Saints who have not experienced what you have experienced?
I contend that we each have our set of challenges, and they're equal. For a loving father, if my challenges were greater than your challenges, I'd have an argument with God. How come? And I liken it often to parents pouring soda in cups for kids. If you've got more than one child, each child is down making sure he is getting or she is getting the same amount as someone else. I think if our circumstances weren't ultimately equal, we would be in that situation. My circumstances have been different than yours and different from anyone else's, but we each have challenges and obstacles to overcome, and those happen to be mine.
As you have observed other Latter-day Saints going through their journey here in the church and in life, do you see anything that puts you in a different category because of the experiences that you've had?
Only that we each have to find our own testimony to truly become a member of a faith. Not just that you were born into it, but that you are a believer, you've explored it, you had the confirmation in your heart that this is where you are to be, that there is a God, that that God loves and cares about you. Those circumstances, again, may be different, but we all have that path, we have that journey. And I really feel sorry for those who have been born into any religion and just accept it and go forward without thought or without having it become a critical element of who they are. So no, mine might be different, but it's equal to yours.
Critics of the church believe that extending the priesthood to all worthy males and essentially lifting the ban on blacks holding the priesthood, African Americans or Africans holding the priesthood, was just a matter of convenience, that there was no revelation involved in this at all, that in fact the church could not move forward in its growth in Africa or elsewhere around the world without extending priesthood leadership opportunities to African descendants. Where do you stand on that? What is your view from where you sit?
There was no political pressure. There had been, a decade or two earlier, there had been political pressure, but there was no political pressure in 1978. Yes, there was an internal pressure because of the temple being built in Brazil, and so many of the members within the confines of that nation being of mixed race or black, and realizing that here were people who were putting their all, whether their goods, their time, their effort, their prayers, into the creation of that temple, and unless something materially changed, they wouldn't be allowed to attend, to be a part of that. There was that pressure, and it was that, I think, that really spurred Spencer Kimball to be prayerful and to seek the guidance of his God.
That must have been a tremendous test of faith for those saints in Brazil who were building a temple that, for all intents and purposes at the time, they could never enter.
I understand that there was a special lesson that was used by missionaries in Brazil at that time. Missionaries were instructed to look and see if there were family photos that were around that might have indicated some degree of ethnic mixing, and to then qualify or disqualify a family. And for those who were a part of that, who would have been disqualified, to remain faithful and to do all they could to promote the church and move it forward, says more than words can imagine.
You have been quite close with several leaders of the church.
Is that a way of saying I'm old?
I wasn't going to say it.
Oh, okay.
But as a good friend to so many leaders of the church over the years, how much of an influence do you feel like your friendship and your conversations with them led to an atmosphere where this revelation could be received and the policy changed wherein Africans would be extended the privileges of the priesthood?
I understand the thrust of the question, and I think it has validity, but not because of me. Remembering some of the earlier black members who worked as Pullman porters and waiters on the trains in the day when that was the mode of travel, and church leaders made the acquaintance of those gentlemen over long periods of time, not a 3-hour flight here or a 4-hour flight there, but a 2-day trip here. And hearing the stories of some of those black individuals and their interactions with the brethren, I think it brought about a reality that this is another human being. This is a child of God. I got to know Brother whomever while we had time together and we chatted on that train ride. And I think that is the key. When we get to know one another, and we don't see an ethnicity, and we don't just see a color, but we start seeing a human being, that's when hearts begin to change. That's when our view as Christians becomes more Christ-like.
How much of a role do you think education played in bringing us to this point? I mean, scientific, cultural, civil education about people that we may not be familiar with. How much of a role do you think it played in creating that atmosphere in which the priesthood ban was lifted?
That's an interesting question. I've never been asked that before. And I don't know. My first response was not much. I don't know if formal education is the key to the human heart. I think, again, it's more on a personal level, on a one-on-one, or if you see someone who's being harmed and you know that that's not right, that doesn't require formal education. That requires a tenderness and openness to seeing another person for whom he or she is. So I really don't know if it plays that much of a role.
In recent years, the church has published an essay on race and the priesthood, and I believe you played a role in that essay, did you not?
Just a minor role. No, seriously.
Okay.
You know, there were those who were very much involved, and mine was a very minor role.
When you realized that the basis for the denial of the priesthood and temple blessings to Africans and those of African descent was based in something less than doctrine, and in fact racism, what kind of a wrestle did that create inside you as a Black Latter-day Saint?
I knew that prior to 2013 when the essay came out on December 6th. Not that I have it memorized, but no, I knew that long before that. In fact, it's one of the 6 spiritual experiences that I've had in my 54 years. And so I know that the prior restriction was not of God. It was not imposed by God. I don't claim that as a revelatory experience for the church, but I do for myself. And I also submitted that in written form to President Hinckley with the request, could I teach that? And I was granted permission to teach it. It was not imposed by God, but it was allowed by God. And when it became too much of an impediment for the growth of the church, for humankind to see one another for who we really are, revelation was required and received by Spencer Kimball to undo that which man had put in place. But I had known that long before.
Having been taught about the LDS Church, joining the LDS Church, being denied priesthood and temple blessings, and now receiving priesthood and temple blessings, what have you learned about the nature of God and yourself?
What have I learned and what do I continue to learn? I am a temple attender. I go for the quiet, the solitude, to commune with my God. But each time I attend the temple, I go with an open mind and a prayer that I might have some new essence taught me, that my mind might hang at times on a single word or the phrasing of something being said, so that I have a better understanding of what it is I'm a part of. And I've been blessed to have that occur. To be able to not only partake of the sacrament, but to bless that sacrament, to be able to exercise priesthood and exercise God's authority and power for the benefit of others. It's not for yourself. It's a remarkable experience. Looking at the picture behind us, the young man who's being blessed by 2 of his other brothers within the gospel, it's a connection from the individual through other individuals directly to God. And to be able to officiate in that capacity is something I didn't think I'd be able to do. And yet I am, and I marvel. And I hope I treat it with respect.
How is your experience as a Latter-day Saint now different from your experience prior to June of 1978?
I'm whole. I remember sitting in sacrament meetings and hearing about temple outings that were upcoming. The ward was going to have a temple outing, or the stake was going to have a temple outing, and knowing that it did not include me. I remember prior to even being fully an adult, but right after my baptism, the youth program for teenagers. We had had an event, and then we were all in the cultural hall, and everyone said, okay, let's go for pizza. And they were divvying up, and you could see people partnering off, you know, this boy, this girl. And you could quickly do the math, and all of a sudden there was me, and there was this one white sister, and I could see that headache coming on. Oh, you know, I'd really love to go, but
Yeah.
being excluded, that was painful, but more than that, being seen by my brothers and sisters as less than. Being seen as not fully a worthy child of God, being in many ways treated as a leper. I don't tell this story often, but sitting in a sacrament meeting, having the sacrament tray come to me, I partook of the sacrament, reached to take the tray to pass it on, and the brother who was passing the sacrament withdrew the tray immediately. So my hand could not touch it, and he reached around me. So the difference is I feel whole. I always felt whole in God's sight. I was raised with a strong Christian upbringing in the Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal, and I have had marvelous experiences there. But it wasn't God's issue that troubled me. It was the issue that my human being brothers and sisters had that troubled me.
Where were you when the revelation was announced? And what went through your heart and your mind at that time?
I was working in my office, and a credit assistant stuck her head in and said, "Hey, Darius, I hear they're going to give the Negroes the priesthood." And I thought it was a joke in poor taste. And I said, "Get out of here." And this good sister repeated it, and I frankly swore. I said, "That's not funny, get out." And yet she persisted and said that she had been on the phone to the church office building, and there was a rumor going around. And as I listened to her, I started to halfway believe, but I turned on a radio that was in my office and a television, thinking that would be breaking news. There was nothing there. And so I did the one thing that seemed logical to me. I picked up the phone and called President Kimball.
Because you could do that.
Well, anyone could do that, but he had just left to go back to the temple, but the secretary knew me and confirmed to me that yes, indeed. And it was a day for those of us who have been there and had that experience, it's a day you will never forget, and you won't forget how you felt and the joy, and for me the disbelief, but the joy. Had to go out to the airport with a workmate who was also LDS, and then picking up another workmate with whom I had shared an office in the Portland office of this company. And coming back in, we stopped off at Temple Square. And just the overwhelming sense of joy, relief, just anticipation for a new future. More than anything, I wanted to share that moment with a fellow by the name of Heber Woolsey. Dr. Woolsey was head of church communications at that time, public affairs, and he and I had gone on trips in defense of the church, quite frankly, giving content and context to what others thought they knew. And Heber and I had been in some tight circumstances, and I went to his office, and long story short, we overlooked the Salt Lake Temple from his office, and we wept, embraced and wept, knowing that everything had changed. Everything had changed.
Latter-day Saints are being reminded from the pulpit that racism has no place in the church whatsoever. How do you feel things are going that way? And how much progress do you think the church has made and individual members have made along those lines? And how much farther do you think we need to go before those kinds of reminders are no longer necessary?
I have seen positive changes in this country, and I say country, not just the church, because we're reflective of what's going on in the country. And I've seen negative. And right now we're in a negative swing. The vitriolic language, the coarseness of conversation, the disdain for people of other ethnicities and cultures, races. I have seen an increase in insensitivity, hostility, and some may not like to hear that, but it's the reality. I tend to be a literalist, and our parents disallowed us to say that something was race-based unless it was absolute and certain. They didn't want us to have a chip on our shoulder and to have an easy out. So when I acknowledge that there is a increased climate of racial discord, it's occurring, and it saddens me. It angers me. I'm not sure what is going to happen for us to get our minds right, as the old folks would say. But where we have been was better than where we are. And where we are is not where we can be and need to be. And yes, we need the voices of our leaders, all of our religious leaders, regardless of faith, denomination, to speak up and to speak out and not to be cavalier about it. People are being harmed. Souls are being wounded. Lives are being disrupted. It's a reality when we allow racism to permeate our culture.
What would you say to Latter-day Saints for whom prejudice and racism is a stumbling block that they just can't seem to get over?
Well, in the words of a movie, Starstruck, get over it. No, but seriously, if something matters to you, if you see that what is occurring is not right and it troubles you, if it's within your own soul and you've not been able to make peace with it, do some research, do some study, become familiar with the real issues are as opposed to those that someone may be waving out there as an issue. And for a person of faith, give it prayer. If you think that's where God is, give it more prayer, because it's not where God is. We are a human family. There really is no such thing as race. There's one race, the human race. We have ethnicities and cultures, but there's one race. We need to become aware of that, accept it, and glory in our diversity, because truly God is the author of our diversity.
What does the LDS Church offer the black community in America, and what does the black community offer the LDS Church in America?
Well, I'll take the last part first. We sing some dynamite songs.
You're talking about the Genesis group.
I am indeed, in the choir, and you need to come to Genesis at some point, every first Sunday, and it's at 7 p.m., and the address is 6710 South, 1300 East. All are welcome. The time is so that it doesn't conflict with any other church meeting. And we have the Deborah Bonner Unity Gospel Choir, and we raise the roof. We raise a glad noise unto the Lord. And yet we will sing songs also out of the LDS hymnal. But there at Genesis, you will have a blending of God's creation, His humanity, white, black, Hispanic, Native American, Pacific Islander, Asian. We are representative of that family, and all are invited. So that's one of the things we bring and offer to the church. I think every culture offers something, and I wouldn't be so bold as to speculate on what it is that might be offered by any particular group alone other than that, because we're by far deeper than our music. But what we have that, as Latter-day Saints, we can offer to all children of God, regardless of race, is further truth, a deeper message. It may not appeal to all, but it's worth looking at and seeing if it appeals to you.
The Quorum of the 12 Apostles now has a native German. It now has a native of Brazil. It now has a man of Asian descent.
Yes.
The given is that, for Latter-day Saints, is that God makes those calls for priesthood leadership like that. But what does that indicate that God may have in store for those of African descent?
That we will have a different look in the first presidency in the Quorum of the 12 at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later.
What value is that to you personally? How do you process that, and what does it mean to you to have that kind of diversity?
I know many of those brethren. I refer to them as the Q15. They're good men, hard-working men. I don't envy any one of them. They can speak well for me and have as a Christian, as a child of God. But there's something special when you can look and see someone who looks like you. That's something I missed early on in my Latter-day Saint experience. I wanted to be able to look over and see someone who looked like Uncle Henry or Aunt Bertha, and to see that black face with the smile that I knew so well in my growing up years. So if you have someone that represents you in look as well as in heart, which hopefully, and I think truly, all of those brethren do, it's a benefit. It helps. It helps you to feel again more whole.
You are involved in the planning of a celebration that marks the 40th anniversary
Yes.
of the extension of the priesthood to all worthy males. What can you tell us about this upcoming celebration?
Wow. It is going to be a major event held in the conference center, and it's going to be at 7 p.m. if I recall. I've got the notes over here. I just left a meeting to come here, and I'm not even remembering all of the notes. That's what age does to you. But I believe the date is June 1st, and all are invited. It's not a black-only event. This is for all of us, because we all celebrated that event in 1978. And again, we are celebrating. And to have the first presidency there, presiding and being active participants. I'm aware of some of the messages that are going to be forthcoming, and they are inclusive, and they are healing. And I think maybe that's the most important part. There are challenges for us as Christians, and some of those challenges will likely be mentioned.
Are you going to be speaking on the program?
Hopefully not.
Hopefully so.
Hopefully not.
Well, Darius Gray, one of the original members of the Genesis group for Black Latter-day Saints, a support group. Thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
Thank you, sir.